Good afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome. Welcome to another edition of Atlas Information Live. I'm your host, Atlas Alex, and today we are going to continue, you might say, with part 2 of a series that we began last week when we talked about the transformation of perception and how the transformation of self begins with the transformation of our perception. Not only our perception of ourselves, but our perception of others, our perception of the world, our perception of reality. And if you recall, specifically, we were referring to the transformation of impressions. And we were discussing and using the analogy of a bingo card. And as bizarre, possibly as bizarre an analogy as that may have seemed, the usefulness of this analogy cannot be overstated because number one, it's simple. And number two, most people know what a bingo card is. Most can visualize most people have played bingo or at least know the nature of the game. And we were using this analogy because unbeknownst to most of us, we have 3 levels of the mind, and we were discussing this last week. The first level we called the sensual mind. The second level, the bingo card, was the intermediate mind. So that's our second mind. And the third, we said, was the superior mind. And that the superior mind related to our higher self, to our being, to be able to receive impressions from the supernal worlds. Whereas the sensual mind, as its name suggests, is limited to the 5 senses. Material, the material world, right? Physical phenomena, material phenomena, empiricism. And in no uncertain terms, mechanical thought. And that the sensual mind, based on all of these inputs, all of these impressions, fills up our internal bingo card of the intermediary mind with all our beliefs and opinions and conditioned subjective experience that is subjected to the sensory, physical, mechanical levels of reality. Another way to conceptualize the 3 levels of our mind is that the sensual mind relates to the physical vessel, the physical vehicle. It is the AI of our Iron Man suit. It is Jarvis. You can also conceptualize the sensual mind, the intermediate, and the intermediate mind that is oriented toward physicality, empiricism, sensuality, as related to the false self. But as I described, and as we were exploring last week, we have a superior mind that is oriented towards our higher self, our innermost Tony Stark, if you will, our innermost being, and the supernal worlds. The worlds of the sixth sense and beyond. So the metaphysical, and not the empirical, but the sublime, and not mechanical, but conscious. Imagination, inspiration, all of the ineffable, subtle, supernal levels of reality. And as we were describing last week, that our perceptions are impacted upon because the mind is it compares and contrasts. That's all it is. It's a processor of information, a mediator. And that when an impression comes in through one of the senses, it is checked against existing beliefs and, let's say, traumas, so-called traumas from our past, unresolved conditioning. And the intermediary mind returns automatically and mechanically a reaction based on the input. The intermediary mind will produce an output into our sensual mind. So the sensual mind receives an input, but if our bingo card is full, then it runs into and it triggers one of the conditioned responses, one of the conditioned states on the intermediary mind. And whatever gets triggered, whatever gets activated, it returns as an automatic reaction. And that what comes into our sensual mind. That is what we think about an impression. What we think, what we believe, how we judge, what we like or don't like about any circumstance. And you can see the problem visually, right? Think of the world out there as a game of bingo, and the world is calling out the numbers. And your sensual mind that belongs to the false self, you, the vessel, the vehicle, are reacting and automatically filling up your bingo card your entire life, right? Not thinking about, not conscious of your experiences. And they're mechanically making their impressions upon you and your intermediate mind. They're filling up your bingo card. But there's another bingo game going on at the same time. Since we're born, there's another caller who's calling out letters and numbers to put into our bingo card. And the still soft voice of that bingo caller cannot compete with the loud, obnoxious, impositional, imposing voices that we're surrounded with and that we surround ourselves with. Right? We're impressed upon by our parents, our family, right? Loved ones, the culture that we grow up in, the traditions that we are expected to follow. And then there's other authority figures. And all of this is all of them have rules and regulations and all sorts of things that they impress upon us, things to believe in, right? Religious leaders, religious authorities. You have the so-called education system, which is a schooling system. And then you have peer pressure and all sorts of these impositions that are conditioning us. They're filling up our bingo card because we are not taught at a young age how to transform our perception, how to transform impressions and digest them consciously. And so we automatically go through life on autopilot, and our bingo card, not only is our bingo card filled up, but as I described, many of these numbers, many of these boxes get repeated over and over and over again. And through that repetition, these X's become thicker and bolder and stronger. And I was using the analogy of a ballpoint pen. And imagine your bingo card is cardboard. And how many times, if you go over the same X over and over and over and over and over again, eventually you're going to wear out the paper. You're going to punch right through. It's going to be permanently etched in that card. There's no whiteout that you can use to blot out an X that has gone through the paper. So ingrained are some of our beliefs and some of our habits and vices because we've just, through the constant, never-ending repetition, repeating the same mistakes and just living on autopilot and thinking and believing the same thing over and over and over again, never questioning it, never looking at it, never observing ourselves, and never transforming the impressions, because impressions are more than just input. Impressions are also the output, what comes into our sensual mind from the intermediate or through the intermediate mind. And so there's this interplay that can take place in the sensual mind where beliefs and dogmas and conditioning from our intermediary mind present themselves back to our sensual mind. And as we act on them and react to them in the same way, we reinforce them. And so we're making these X's bolder all the time. right? Going over them again and again with the ballpoint pen. And again, visually, you can see what the problem is. The problem is, what about all this? Right? There's no room in the inn. Remember, Joseph and Mary were looking for a place to stay in Bethlehem, but there was no room at the inn. It was all filled up. It was all booked, like the bingo card. The still soft voice, the cries of the newborn Christ, our innermost intimate Christ, our being, our essence, the still soft voice. There's no room in the inn. There's no room in our bingo card for it to mark, to make its mark on us, such that we have truth, objective divine truth, so that when we encounter an impression and digest it, transform it, do not react automatically. Do not allow, even if it does trigger some red X here and an auto output comes, we don't look at what we automatically think, believe, judge, like, and don't like automatically based on an impression, based on an input. We observe all that and say, okay, I see that. I see the automatic response. But we pause, take a breath, and we allow the consciousness to take a look at our bingo card and say, what is the appropriate response that we receive from the superior mind, given this circumstance, given this impression, this input? And in the performance of this and the practice of this, we transform ourselves from an automatic, reactive, machine-like, human-like machine that is responding like an AI, like ChatGPT, based on its conditioning, based on its so-called learning, right? We are able to respond consciously because we have space. We have left space on our card to be given guidance from within, or we can call on our experiential knowledge, that which we seek, that which is self-evident experiential knowledge that exists in the superior mind. You see, because new impressions, new inputs have the potential to change these red X's into blue ones. And each time we have a new experience and we give it over to our higher self to respond, to inform us about the nature of that experience, or we meditate on our impressions, on our experiences, we have the ability to receive new impressions, new information, new truths. In other words, we have the capacity, the ability, the potential to comprehend those impressions. This is just a summary of last week on the transformation of impressions and how this relates to the transformation of self. But this is only the first level of, of understanding the mind and the interactions that take place. Because behind all of this, we have active entities, acting agents that are involved in this process of filling up our bingo card with red X's. Clearly, there is an active, intelligent agent that is filling up our bingo card with blue X's from the superior mind, and that's our higher self. That's our true self. That's a very active agent, obviously, that respects our free will and that loves us. It's our higher self. It's our innermost player. It's the Tony Stark to our Iron Man. The Tony Stark to our Iron Man suit and our personality Jarvis, our AI. But clearly, this automatic nature, this judgmental, reactive, mechanical nature, is also dependent upon active agents. This doesn't happen by accident, this process, the fact that we have to transform impressions. Behind every belief, behind every trauma, behind every like and dislike, behind every judgment, one of these agents, these acting algorithms, are responsible, are involved. And I, of course, am referring to egos. The real problem with the automatic, because you might ask, well, what's wrong with automatic reactions? What's wrong with thinking? What's wrong with having beliefs? What's wrong with, judgments? What's wrong with having likes and dislikes? And what's wrong with it is that they're all lies. Your senses lie to you. The material world is an illusion. Empiricism is an illusion. Mechanical thought is an illusion. Egos are agents of deception. Truth comes from consciousness, comes from the being, comes from our supernal mind, that which is sublime, that which is objective. Subjective, empirical, mechanical beliefs are deceptions. The automatic thinking of the sensual mind as it relates to conditioned beliefs imprinted upon the intermediary mind, they are by definition false. They are subjective. They're just beliefs, they're just opinions. They are contrivances. And they are hypnotic. They hypnotize the consciousness, which is another way to conceptualize this bingo card being filled up with red X's. And becoming obsessed with the sensual mind and what I think and what I believe. Because thinking you know is not knowing. So you might ask, well, what's the point of all this? What's like, why should this all be deception? What's the point of it? Because that deception is a prison. And the egos are the warden and the guards. They are the keepers of that prison. They are the bricks and mortar in the walls, and they are the steel in the fences and the barbed wire and the bars. It is a prison for your consciousness. And quite some time ago, last year at Easter, we were talking about the Shawshank Redemption and how it is possible that the Shawshank Redemption is so beloved a film because it's perhaps the perfect allegory for the human condition. And a humanity that, let's face it, is very clear. It's beyond any shadow of a doubt that humanity is trapped in its sensual mind. Materialist science, materialism, consumerism, the obsession with pleasure, the obsession with pleasure and the obsession with the avoidance of pain, the complete and total preoccupation of this humanity with indulging its desires. Humanity is caught in a prison, and it is a web of deception. Like a spider that weaves a web to trap its prey. And the more the prey struggle to try to escape that web, the more they entangle themselves, the more wrapped up they get inside that web. We get entangled in the lies, in the deceit, and our own self-deception. You probably know from your own experience that many of these beliefs that you hold from your youth, or they're not so easy to get rid of. They're not so easy to clear from your internal bingo card. And the reason they're not is, we can talk about, because of identification and attachment. And we can use these words, so you don't want to let go of them. But is it really you who doesn't want to let go of your identification and attachments to beliefs and judgments and likes and dislikes? Is it really you who can't let go? Or are you being deceived? Who is the you that can't let go? You see, when we talk about the transformation of perception, and we observe our sensual mind, our intermediary mind, and the interaction between the two, and we observe receiving into the intermediary mind from the supernal mind, the superior mind, intuition, insight, imagination, and guidance from within. It's from that state of conscious self-observation where we are the observer and we don't identify with the machinations of the mind itself. The mind is a tool. It's a mind is something that the consciousness possesses. But when you start talking about letting go of beliefs, who is the I that is letting go there? Who is the I that is attached? And this is where it gets very troublesome for most people on the spiritual path, because they can't answer that question. They don't know how. They think they do, but they don't. And they deceive themselves. They remain trapped in deception. They remain trapped in their eyes, their ego. And replacing one belief with another belief is robbing Peter to pay Paul. And we started out this year talking about that when we explored the whole world of self-help gurus and these new age coaches and so on who are so adamant about reinventing yourself and tearing down the old and being reborn, and they use all kinds of Christian imagery and biblical references. But disassociating yourself from old beliefs and replacing them with new ones, that's not a transformation. That's not a transformation of yourself. On the surface, it appears like a transformation. But it's self-deception. Because what good is it if, to use our analogy here, what good is it if I take out all of these X's, these red X's, and it's unfortunately it's deleting my grid, right? But what happens if I take out all those red X's and replace them with red circles? I got rid of all the red X's, right? No more red X's. Now I've got circles. I got new beliefs. Well, there's an obvious problem, right? Is that I haven't solved the problem. I'm still in deception. I'm just living under new deceptions. Because the algorithms, the egos, the sources of the deception, the sources of the beliefs and the judgments and the opinions and the automatic thoughts and automatic reactions and bad habits, the conditioning, the cause of all of that, the source of the deception are still there. Do you transform yourself by changing your clothes? We have the materialists believe so. We even have expressions, the clothes make the man. But are you a different person because you dress differently? To the outside world, and on a certain level, when you look in the mirror, how about if you lose 20 pounds or 30 pounds? Or go to the gym and work out for 5 years and gain a bunch of muscle and lose a lot of weight? Are you a different person? On a material, very superficial level, yes, you are. You're stronger, you're fitter, you're healthier. But no, you're the same person. You're a stronger, fitter, healthier version of the same person. You changed the red X's of overweight, unhealthy, and weak into the red circles of strong, fit, and healthy. But that new identity that you built has just has filled up your bingo card again, because it is the associated egos behind those beliefs that are actually occupying the space. They are the ones actually vying for your attention. That is your consciousness. And they are actively competing to get you to act out what they tell you to think and believe and judge and do and desire and indulge. Because when you give in to their temptations, that's when they reinforce their position. Yes, absolutely. And they feed off your consciousness, they and your vital energy. And that allows them to become stronger and to propagate and to start filling up even more of your bingo card, gobbling up even more of your consciousness, shutting out your being. So in the moment, the transformation of perception, the transformation of impressions is essential. But there is another level to all of this. And that level is transmutation, and I'm calling it transmutation of deception. This is the next level. But the two are intimately connected. And before we get into it, Azazel says, hello. Well, hello, Azazel. Nice to have you here today. Let's look at this word transmutation. Now, mutation, we know that that word means changed, altered in a significant, fundamental way. A mutant is one who is genetically different, right? So a mutation is a fundamental alteration in the genetic foundation of a life form. And trans, meaning from here to there, like transport. So moving from one genetic state to another, a transmutation. So a mutant is different from the population. To transmute is to change. Now, we should also mention another word for this. The medieval word for this was alchemy. Now, alchemy means to fuse or cast a metal. That's the literal meaning. But in terms of revolutionary psychology, in terms of esotericism and occultism, alchemy was always related to the symbolic activity or goal of transmuting lead into gold. This is the traditional and most well-known function or goal of the alchemists. And they did so, again, according to tradition, via the 9-sided cubic stone or alchemical or philosophical stone. So it's a 4-sided pyramid on top of a cube. That's how you get 9 sides. And all of this is Kabbalistic, 9 relating to Yesod, the 9th sphere on the tree of life. And the lead that they were transmuting was the lead of ego into the gold of the solar bodies. And we can put in brackets here the human soul. Egos are deceptive, just as lead is toxic, poisonous. Lead is very malleable. Lead has a lot of the same properties as gold. It's soft. It's a soft metal. It's easy to work with. It's compliant. And as a result, in the past, many civilizations have suffered tremendously. Like, for example, when they made pipes out of lead, because lead was abundant, it was inexpensive, it was easy to work with. They just didn't know at the time that it was toxic. So using it for plumbing and piping was not a good idea. So it's deceptive, lead is. It seems like it's very useful and practical. In the same way, the ego is the same way. Your egos, I'm going to put that in plural there. Your egos come to you offering all kinds of help, all kinds of practical, useful services, worldly, and sometimes otherworldly services. In the case of all of those people who have got themselves caught up in black magic, well, the egos want to do manifestation of desires. They want to be able to mind control. They want to be able to get their way, and that means getting your way, right? But again, who is that you that's getting their way? You see, because every ego presents itself as an I. And it's usually I want or I don't want. I like, I don't like. It's craving and aversion. But because they present themselves in our sensual mind as an I, if we automatically receive that impression and don't transform it, when the thought comes into our head, I want ice cream. I want ice cream. Innocuous enough, right? I want ice cream. Yeah, but who is the I that's making the statement? Who wants ice cream? What wants ice cream? Understanding that every ego presents itself as an I. And if you observe yourself eating the ice cream, maybe you have a dialogue first. I want ice cream. Yeah, but I better have only a little. I better not have the entire tub. So I want ice cream. That's some ego, gluttony perhaps. Wants ice cream. Presents as I want ice cream. But then another ego, pride, vanity, worried about looking good in the swimsuit. We're just about in summer. It's almost June. So the I that's worried about what it's going to be looking like with its shirt off, or in a bathing suit in a month and a half, is going to say, well, I better not have too much. So the I of gluttony is now having a debate with the I of vanity over how much ice cream do I really want? Or do I want ice cream at all? In which case you really question, well, where did the desire for ice cream come from if I don't really want ice cream? Because it's more important for me to look good in a swimsuit than it is for me to satisfy my craving for ice cream. And again, we say I and my. Meanwhile, these impressions are expressions coming from agents of deception. That little dialogue that I just shared with you, this happens to us every single day of our lives, multiple times a day. Multiple times a day, we find ourselves in so-called indecision. Now, sometimes the debate, the argument is between an I and our true self. In other words, what we know we shouldn't do versus two desires, two competing desires. So in other words, you can have two competing desires. I want ice cream, but I also want to look good on the beach. And the two are like in conflict. I want to look good on the beach, but I also want ice cream. But sometimes, obviously, it's our conscience. So perhaps when you were younger, either a child or a teenager, and you didn't have much money, but you were in a toy store or maybe a music store, and you saw an opportunity to grab something that you wanted and put it inside your coat and walk out the store. In other words, to shoplift. Nobody would know. The store clerk was busy in the back helping somebody else. There was nobody around. And certainly when I was a kid, there weren't security cameras everywhere. It was easy to shoplift. And I'll be honest with you, there were times when I was a kid that I was tempted to, steal, whether it was a Hot Wheels car or a GI Joe or whatever the case may be. I didn't have a lot of money. My friends came from much wealthier families, and they all had GI Joes and everything else. And I wanted to participate, so it was tempting, right? But what kept me from doing it? Maybe it was fear of getting caught. But we all know what it's like when our conscience is pricked. When we are tempted to do something and we know it's not right, we know we shouldn't. It's not a competing ego. But the point that I'm making is the I in that I want, right? I want or don't want. I need, I desire, right? That's a deception. Temptation is deception. Even if there's truth in it, it's twisted, it's corrupted, it is tainted. Because the very structure of the statement, beginning with the letter I, and what that represents, and what that does to our psyche, to our consciousness, is deception, is hypnosis. Because it's hypnotic. When you observe yourself, I want this, I don't want that, I like this, I don't like that. And all of these competing egos that are battling one another. You can think about it as the Game of Thrones, all the different houses competing for the Iron Throne. Or you can think about it in terms of that game King of the Hill we used to play when we were kids, right? Where somebody was at the top of the hill and others were coming and they were trying to knock them off the top. But every time an ego gets to the top of that hill and proclaims itself the king of the hill, it does so with a desire, with a proclamation. And that proclamation is by definition a deception. So right? What do we transmute that into? Let's got a couple of comments. Let's get to them before we continue here. Benjamin says, now that we have a basic understanding of how AI and computers work, it's almost as if our minds come preloaded with different software, the various egos, constantly influencing and deceiving us. It seems like we're born with these mental programs already installed. No one is born with egos, but we do have karma from previous lifetimes. And so those egos incorporate into us, reincorporate into us each time we're born. And they're fully incorporated by the age of 7. So you never buy a computer or a phone that has all of the apps you need already on it, right? You get a device with an operating system, but each new device you get, you have to install all of the apps that you use, and you have to sign up and sign in to all of everything that you did on the previous phone has to be reintegrated into the new phone. Now, there are applications and services that make some of this more automated, but it still takes time, it still takes effort. So the reason I say that is because you mentioned because we understand, we know how AI and how computers work. Well, I'm just expressing to you that you don't buy a computer or a phone with everything you need already on it. You have to install it. It's the same way that when you were born into a new body, everything that you're taking from your previous body has to be installed into your new body. Now, that's not necessarily going to be memories and all that kind of stuff, but it is going to be your karma, your egos. And that process, by the way, for children who are born very conscious and clairvoyant, that process can be very harrowing indeed, because that's why it's a universal experience all over the world. Every culture in the world, there's the universal experience of children being afraid of monsters in the closet, monsters under the bed, children afraid of the dark, afraid of going to sleep, afraid of being attacked in their sleep. Because what these children are experiencing is the reintegration of egos. Egos are demons. Monsters under the bed, monsters in the closet, and they come mostly at night. They come and they reintegrate. The applications come to be reinstalled into the new human-like machine because it's karma. If you didn't learn your lesson in your previous life, well, that application, that program has to come and reintegrate into you for this life so that you can learn your lesson. So that can be a very harrowing experience for young children who are, like I say, they have some clairvoyance. Because when you're born without egos, sure, you have a tremendous amount of clairvoyance and consciousness because nothing's bottled up yet, because nothing's been reintegrated yet. That's why infants are so beautiful. Why babies, they look like this, or like they're pure consciousness. Everything to them is like the most amazing thing they've ever witnessed because of the forgetting. They're just clean slates. And by 7 years old, the personality is completely developed. All of the egos are completely reincorporated, and maybe some new egos, because, if they're terrible twos and this, that, and the other thing, right? Which is why terrible twos are the way they are, because a lot of egos reintegrate by the time someone is 2 years old. But the 2-year-old has very little capacity to, and has had very little in the way of any kind of moral or ethical training, or really, it's the egos that incorporate prior to and around the age of 2, they're just running rampant with this 2-year-old. And you can see that, and that's why we have this concept called the terrible 2, and it's not a concept, it's a reality. So, so in a sense, we are born with these mental programs, but again, they have to be installed into our new human-like machine. So there's a process there. But they carry from one lifetime to another. I just don't I just felt it was important to make the distinction here, to say that like babies are not babies aren't born with all the mental programs inside them already, right? That you can see that, you can experience that. You've never seen a terrible baby, right? That is, by the way, one of the reasons why babies cry constantly and cry all night, and why they'll start spontaneously screaming, because you would too if you saw an ego incorporating into you, and you had the consciousness to be fully aware of it, and you had the clairvoyance to be fully aware of it. You just don't have the capacity of speech to be able to articulate what it is you're experiencing in any other way than screaming, right? That's why babies scream and cry like they do. And follow up, Benjamin also says it was probably your conscience that kept you from shoplifting. Uh, yeah, but it was six of one, one half dozen of the other, because fear played a big role in my life, always has, right? So I was very timid, not a very adventurous child, and certainly my parents put their fear into me as well, right? So that didn't help. Not to say that would have made me uh, override my conscience. I'm just saying that it wasn't. I was not. Was I was I was not beyond reproach. I was not born without sin. I mean, let's not kid ourselves here, right? Yes, I had a conscience in many different capacities, but fear played a tremendously powerful influence in my life. Where were we? Ah, yes. How do we translate, well, the deception into truth? How do we transmute? And the first easiest way to do that is, I don't want, that is too simplistic a language. So we need, in our self-observation, in our transformation of impressions, our perception needs to be more precise. An alchemist needs to fully comprehend the ingredients in the same way that a magician has to choose his words of power carefully as he assembles a spell. If we want to equate alchemy with magic, let's say. So if alchemy, right, which is, of course, the precursor of modern day chemistry, although chemistry is an abomination compared to genuine alchemy, because alchemy is metaphysical. It has a physical component, but it's metaphysical in nature. Chemistry is purely physical. It's empirical. It's the work of ego. But magic works with symbols and words and the effect that they have, both physical and metaphysical. So let's look at a simple example. Remember, we were saying, I want ice cream. I am hungry for ice cream. Now, why is it important to phrase it that way? Because I want is too simple, too trite, too vague. It doesn't tell you anything. Because the mind, the sensual mind, because it's mechanical, it's going to operate under the laws of the law of conservation of energy. So if you receive an intuition to go get ice cream, which you might very well receive through your intermediary mind, from your superior mind, to go and experience ice cream. Maybe you're in Vienna, maybe you're in Paris, maybe wherever you are, you pass by a gelato shop and it's just filled with all of these exotic flavors and so on and so forth. And it's like, you're here, you're on vacation, you're traveling, you've never been here before, you walk by this, and it's like, it's an opportunity to experience. Why not? Why wouldn't you experience it? That's a once in a lifetime experience, potentially, to be somewhere in Europe or who knows where, and have authentic Italian gelato in one of who knows how many homemade secret one of a kind formulas. It's a once in a lifetime experience, potentially. You don't have to have a liter of it. Certainly, if you go to a gelato shop, you won't be able to afford a liter of it. You'll have a scoop or a couple scoops. That's all you can afford in an authentic Italian gelato shop, because it's like $4 a scoop anyway. So you're not gonna get a quart. You're not gonna get a pint. But your sensual mind, your ego, is gonna interpret that and twist it into, oh, I want gelato. I want some of that, instead of, wow, I would really like to experience what that's like. So when you look at I want ice cream, you say, I am hungry for ice cream. For many emotions, our sensual mind will express them as I am. I am sad, I am depressed, I am angry, I am anxious, right? I'm afraid, and on and on and on and on and on the list goes. It's useful and practical to get in the habit of interpolating the trite mechanical expressions of the sensual mind and allow it, give it permission to express itself as an I am. Why? Because all of these are boldface lies. These are all deceptions. These are all lies. All of them. Yeah. They're all lies. And we've talked about this in the past. What's the truth? The truth is I feel. I feel hungry for ice cream. I feel depressed. I feel sad. I feel angry. I feel anxious. I feel afraid. These statements are the objective truth. Allowing yourself to identify with, I am depressed, you're trapped in the lie. You're trapped in the deception. Because no, you are not depressed. You are not depression. You are what you are. You are who you are. You are a human-like machine. You are a mortal vessel for your innermost being. There is nothing inherently depressed about you. Depression is a state. Depression is a condition. Con meaning with, and dition meaning state. But ironically, con also refers to con artist. It is a condition that is potentially highly deceptive. If it presents itself as I am that condition, instead of I feel the consequences of the condition, I feel the expression of the condition, I feel the symptoms of the condition. Because that's an objective truth. You are experiencing what you are experiencing. And there is no experience that you should try to avoid. Right? We are not talking about denying that you're hungry for ice cream, or denying that you're sad, or repressing your anger, or sweeping under the rug the fact that you're anxious and afraid. No, that's repression, that's avoidance. We're not talking about that. We're talking about transmutation of a deception into a truth. The deceptive egos into the human soul, whose currency is truth and objective knowledge. The deceit, the subjectivity of the mechanical, deterministic egos, the algorithms that are trying to fill up your intermediate mind, your bingo card with all their red X's, with a conscious experience of the reality of the situation, so you can put a blue X on your bingo card, having received the knowledge from your supernal mind. that knows not to identify with I am depressed or I am hungry or I am sad, and simply observe that my human-like machine, my mortal vessel, this self, feels hungry, is feeling hunger, is feeling a craving, is experiencing a craving for sweets, sugar and fat specifically. As an aside, we can talk a little bit later. Remind me during the question and answers at the end, remind me to tell you about some of the insights I've received this week in relation to diet and sugar and fat. They're not much of in way of an insight, to be honest with you. It's just phenomenal. Nobody craves sugar. That's the God honest truth. Nobody's addicted to sugar. That's a lie. So, well, we can get into that at the end if you're interested. I just share that as an aside. So coming back to it, the lead is I am depressed, I am sad, I am angry, I am anxious. And you see, when you say that, it's heavy. It's like lead. There's a heaviness there, and it's toxic and it's poisonous to the psychology because it's all deception, it's all lies. You are not depression. You are not sadness. You are not fear. Any more than your dog, who's infested with worms, the poor thing, right, can be riddled with parasites, but you don't suddenly say, oh, my dog is a parasite. That's ridiculous. You would never say that. Even if somebody has cancer, you don't say, oh, he is cancer, right? Even if you got sick or if you had cancer or some parasite or something, you wouldn't go around saying, I am cancer. But that's exactly what the egos do to us when we're afraid, when we're possessed by anger, when we're possessed by sadness, by anxiety, by the desire to control. What do we say? I want to be in control. Or I am in control. I am in control of my own life, we say. That's literally like saying, I am cancer. You've probably never thought of it like that before. But this is how deceptive the false self and all of these eyes, the ego is. People talk about egos like some kind of I don't know, some weird thing out there. It's not out there, it's in here. Every moment of every day, every time we have these thoughts, I am this, I am that, and oh God, I'm such an idiot. You made a mistake. You made a mistake. You did something idiotic. Sure. You had a momentary lapse of reason. You had a momentary lapse of idiocy. But that's like literally meditate on this. Really contemplate how absolutely self-sabotaging and completely fantastical in the worst possible way would it be for you to walk around telling people, I am cancer. I was diagnosed last week. I am cancer. And that's exactly what the ego does to us. That's exactly what's happening when we're walking around telling people, oh, I'm depressed, or I'm anxious, or I'm this, or I'm that. And all these people on the internet, on freaking TikTok, right, telling the world, oh, I'm this and I'm that, or I'm woke, or I'm trans, or I'm this and I'm that. I am what I'm black, I'm Republican, I'm Democrat. No, you're not. No, you're not. Something inside of you believes you are, thinks you are, and then convinces you to go out and tell the world that you are that. That's me getting a tick under my skin and then walking around telling everybody, hey, I'm a tick, or I'm Lyme disease, right? It sounds ridiculous when you say it, the reality of it, when you look at it objectively with the superior mind. Consciously, when you look at it, you realize it is absolutely catastrophically absurd. It is a tragicomedy. It's not even a tragedy. It's freaking comical. It is so absurd. It is completely absurdist. And yet, it is the norm. It is the status quo. Now, every time anybody says to you, I am this, I am that, or when you hear yourself, when you receive such an impression, oh, I'm so sad, or I'm so hungry. Remember, would you say to yourself, I am cancer, I am heart disease, I am dehydration? That's what you're saying when you say, I'm dehydrated. No, you say, I'm suffering from dehydration. I'm experiencing dehydration. I'm feeling dehydrated. I'm feeling depressed. I'm feeling angry. I'm experiencing anxiety. That is the truth. And when you reorient yourself to the observer, observing the vessel, the vehicle, experiencing, and you transmute the lie, I am depressed, into the gold of the truth, the lead of the lie into the gold of the truth. Into the gold of the objective truth of what you are experiencing, because it's the experiencer, the consciousness. But we're not done. We're not done. Because remember, there was an ego. There was an ego. Uh-oh. Okay, good. There was an ego behind that I, behind that lie, that deception. You can transmute the deception into truth in the moment, but you cannot transmute the source of the deception, the cause of the lie, cannot be transmuted in the moment. You can transform the impression, you can correct the lie, you can transmute the lie, you can transmute the deception, but we're still left with the deceiver, the egos themselves, the source of the deception. And it's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to do it in the moment, because you're in the moment, you're experiencing. So let's go back here. Understanding that, as I was describing when Benjamin was talking about being born with these programs, these mental programs, these egos, They are expressions of our karma. They exist in order to teach us something, to show us something. They imprint onto our intermediary mind, our intermediate mind, and they constantly seek to express themselves. And they attract to them circumstances and inputs that energize them, that wake them up and bring them up to the surface. In the past, I have used the example of Jaws or Shark Week. If we want to use a more contemporary example, but I've used the allegory of chumming the water. So you put dead fish and bloody fish carcasses, freshly killed fish into the water. And what does this do? Right? It attracts the sharks, brings them to the surface, could potentially even cause a feeding frenzy. But the point is, if you're hunting a shark or if you're hunting a whale, now whaling's different because whales have to come up for oxygen. But sharks don't need to do that, right? And sharks are deep sea predators. They really only come to the surface to feed, particularly great whites. So I've used this allegory in the past of Jaws and chumming the waters. Why? So when Jaws comes to the surface, they can shoot with a harpoon. They can get a barrel into his fin. And if they get enough barrels into the shark, then he can't dive anymore because the barrels float. And so because Jaws is enormous, he's actually a megalodon. He's not really a great white shark. He's closer to a megalodon, but whatever. The point is that they get like 6 or 7 barrels into him. So finally he can't dive anymore. So because he can't dive anymore, he has to be close to the surface. Now they have a shot at killing him because he can't hide anymore. He can't go deep where they can't get to him. When we observe, right, ourselves and we recognize, it's like we mark the ego. When it comes up to the surface and we spot the deception, right? We mark the deceiver. I'm gonna stay. I'm gonna try to keep things consistent here across our little slides. So we're talking about transmutation of deception. Before you can transmute the deception, you can transmute the deception, but that's not enough, right? The deception is the path to the deceiver, but first you have to mark the deceiver. Who or what is doing the deception? Right? So, so which ego is it? Which ego is who's the deceiver? Is it fear? Is it pride? Is it gluttony? Is it laziness? Which ego is it? Which ego is behind this I am? Now, some of them are going to be Easy, right? I am afraid. I am anxious. Well, obviously, the deceiver is fear. It's very easy. And in broad strokes, that's why in the moment, you want to be able to mark the deceiver. It's relatively easy because when the shark comes to the surface, he has a big dorsal fin sticking out of the water. That's what you target, and that's what you want to get a barrel into. You mark where the shark is, and you get a barrel into him. There he is, and you get a barrel into him. So there's pride, there's fear, there's vanity, there's shame, whatever it is. And you mark it in the moment. Say, okay. So this lie, this deception, this was coming from this ego. So you mark the deceiver. That's in part of the observation, the transformation of the impression. But then we have to go deeper than that. We have to analyze. But this analysis, okay, cannot take place in our sensual mind. The analysis must be given to must take place in the superior mind. In other words, to put it in no uncertain terms, the analysis is done by our being. Via our consciousness. So what we observe and what we mark, we catch the deception, we catch the lie, and then we mark the deceiver, we mark the liar, the ego. But actually, I'm going to make a correction here, because marking the ego in the moment and remembering to observe it, paying attention to W5H, right? Who, what, where, when, why, and how. This is what journalists are told to look for in any particular story, in any particular circumstance. Who, what, when, where, why, and how. So who is the deceiver, right? That's marking the deceiver. That's step one. Who is the deceiver? What are they doing? What was the deception? What was the lie? Where was I? Where was the plot hatched? Where was the deception coming from? And where was it going to? When was all of this taking place? And how did the deception go down? How did it make me feel? How was it playing out? How was the deception playing out? All of that comes through self-observation in the moment, or what we can call mindfulness, right? This is all part and parcel. All of this is all part of what people call mindfulness. All of this takes place in the moment when the deception arises, and you catch it, and you transform the impression, and you transmute it from a deception into a truth, and you mark the deceiver, and you observe with W5H. Who, what, where, when, why, and how. And again, this W5H, this is journalism 101. If you can't remember W5H, ask ChatGPT to tell you what it means. Or just go and do a search for the internet for what do journalists look for in the moment? Who, what, where, when, why, how. Or just even if you're think about stories, think about a writer writing a story, a plot for a movie or a book. Who, what, who is the character? What is happening? Where is it taking place? The location, the setting. Okay, why are the circumstances happening? Why is this taking place? Who, what, where, when? Oh yes, when is it taking place? What time of day, what year, what season, morning, noon, or night, etc. And then how? Who, what, where, when, why, and how. How is it playing out? With that information, later in the day, in the evening, we can enter into meditation. And we can, in meditation, we can analyze. But how do we do that if, as I said, we're not using our sensual mind? Meditation is all about quieting the mind. Because if we can quiet the mind, and if we can reduce the impact of the conditioned intermediary mind, it's like we can remove the red X's from our bingo card and free up all kinds of slots, all kinds of boxes on our internal bingo card. And by observing and analyzing consciously, doing what? Replaying, playing over the events that we observed. Playing over the who, what, where, when, why, and how of the deceiver. Who was the deceiver? What was the deception? Where was I? Where was I when the deception took place? When was it? Was it in the morning? Was it in the evening when I was tired and exhausted after a long day? In other words, all of the different factors can play into our analysis as we flesh out and really recreate and reconstruct all of the circumstances that we observed in relation to that moment of deception, whether we had gotten caught up in it or not, right? Like sometimes we will get caught up in the moment, right? And we will say, yeah, I am angry, and not just think we're angry or say we're angry. We'll act on that anger, right? And it's all happened to all of us. Or we'll act on our fear. We'll act on those egos. We'll say or do something we regret afterwards. And that's when we really have to go back and analyze in meditation what took place. How were we possessed? How did we fall for the deception? How did the deceiver get the best of us? We do this in retrospection meditation by looking back on our day and picking the event, the circumstance around that particular deceiver. And we replay it without reliving it. We're not here to relive all the pain and suffering. It would be pointless for you to meditate on a circumstance of anger that occurred to you during the day and then work yourself up into an angry frenzy in meditation. That's pointless. right? That would be reinforcing the very thing that you're trying to transmute. So you want to just stay in that state of detached observer, indifferent, really indifferent, not judging, not condemning, not listening to the voices in your head that are going to be saying, oh, you stupid this, you dumbass, why did you say this, why did you say that, you should have done this, you should have done that, and so on and so forth. You just want to look at the facts, the objective facts. Which ego was doing the deception? Which ego was responsible for the deception? Who, what, where, when, why, and how was that deception, that deceiver, getting the best of me? In other words, how was I being conned? That's what you're trying to get at. But you can't do this with sensual mind. You can't think it through. You just have to keep observing and observing and observing and wait. Patience is a virtue. But eventually, from your consciousness, from your being, into your superior mind, a flash of comprehension will come. And you will just know. Boom, there it is. Ah, so that's how it was getting the best of me. That's how it does it. It waits until this time of day, until this circumstance, and it gets me during my morning commute or during my evening, or it gets me at the office, or it gets me in the kitchen or in the pantry. How is it that gluttony always gets me to freaking open up a box of crackers or open up a bag of Cheetos and eat half the bag? How does it do that? Well, where am I? Well, maybe in the pantry or maybe in the grocery store. When is it? Well, in the morning when I'm hungry, or in the afternoon when I'm hungry. And it waits until I'm hungry to get me to go to the store. And it gets me to go down the potato chip aisle, right? These are facts. Where was I? I was in the grocery store, in the potato chip aisle, or I was in the house, in the pantry, in the cupboard, in the kitchen, in the basement, in front of the TV. God, how is it that I can eat an entire bag of Doritos in front of the TV like this? Well, you can't analyze that without knowing, where were you? What were you watching? How were you feeling? Who was doing the deception? Because eating a bag of Doritos is a deception. Your being does not want to eat an entire bag of Doritos or entire tub of ice cream. Sorry, it just doesn't. Okay, so the idea that you wanted to do that in any capacity is a lie, is a deception. So how do you get to the bottom of it? How do you comprehend the mechanics of that deception? How did you fall for it? And how many times have we fallen for it? Over and over and over, again and again and again. How many times have we ate our way to the bottom of a bag of chocolate chip cookies or a bag of Doritos or whatever the hell it is? Or the how many times have we polished off an entire bottle of wine or a bottle of whiskey or six pack of beer, whatever the case may be? We've all been there. We've all done it in some capacity. Perhaps we've smoked an entire pack of cigarettes in one sitting. We've all experienced some kind of binging behavior like this at some point in our life, and we all have different vices. So for all of us, it's different, right? It's similar, but maybe not exact, right? Some people binge on cookies, some people binge on chocolate, some people binge on ice cream, some people binge on Doritos, some people like me are able to binge on all of them, right? There's nothing unique about that necessarily, but the point is, if you don't do this exercise, if you don't go into the alchemical chamber, the alchemical laboratory, and do the science, do the examination, do the study, how can you perform the alchemy? How can you perform the transmutation? How can you turn the lead, right, of the deception into the gold, the golden truth? This is the gold that the lie leads us to. Because behind every lie is a truth. Behind every deception is a reality. Behind every fantasy is a reality. Our goal is to know that reality objectively, directly, consciously. And there are universal truths that can only be arrived through the comprehension of their opposite. There is no truth without its antithesis. There is no gnosis without hypnosis and ignorance. And there is no path to gnosis except through hypnosis and ignorance. Hypnosis and ignorance is the result of us having fallen for the deception. And the famous deception, of course, is the deception of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. When the serpent says, eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge and you will be like gods, knowing good and evil. Well, there's truth in there, but the way it was presented was not above board. But that is the prototypical deception. That is, and the deceiver twists and tempts accordingly. And how do we fall for that? Well, look at the temptation. Look at that book in the Bible. You will be like gods. Right? But who is the you? You will be like gods? What does that mean? Say it out loud to yourself. I will be like the gods. I will be. That's a future tense version of I am. I am the gods. You see that all the time in the New Age circles. People, these so-called affirmations, people telling themselves, I am God. I am pure I am pure oneness. I am pure abundance. I am perfect abundance. I am perfect this. I am perfect that. I. What they're doing is, number one, it's all a deception. And what they're doing is filling up, they're using their central mind to fill up their bingo card with reasonable hand-drawn facsimiles of perfection. And in doing so, they're blocking out They are actually blocking out their inner source of perfection and truth. They're lying to themselves. They're saying, I am superior. I have powers. I am powerful. I am sublime. I am a god already. I. And all of that, all of those lies that sound like the truth, because there's truth in that deception, right? There's truth in those lies. Just as the serpent tricked Adam and Eve. Their egos, their adversary, is deceiving them with what? A half-baked, twisted, corrupted version of the truth, which is a lie. A twisted, corrupted version of the truth is a lie, is a deception. And that deception, prevents the actual source of truth within them from reaching them and correcting them. So they have no choice but to face external suffering, which they're able to do what's called spiritual bypassing. Oh, positivity! I'm the power of positive thinking, and everything that happens, they think that they're transforming negatives into positive. They think they're transmuting. They think they're turning all the negative things in their life into positive things. But they're not performing. They're not transforming impressions, right? They're doing what we said earlier. They're robbing Peter to pay Paul. Their life is giving them red X's, and they're changing them into red dots on the fly. And they think they're transforming themselves and transforming their reality because they're transforming their perception, right? Because all the so-called bad stuff that's happening, no, it's all really good stuff. It's all good. It's all good. It's all good. I'm a god already. I'm one with the universe already. So, and I'm here to experience blah, blah. And it's just all these rationalizations, all these thoughts and beliefs and so on and so forth in the sensual mind, based on all these beliefs and dogmas that they have filling up their intermediate mind. But it's all deception. They're not performing transformation of their perception, and they're especially not performing the transmutation of that deception, because they're not even aware of the egos. They're not even aware that their I is the adversary, their inner Pharisee that I've been talking about for 3 weeks now. And they definitely are not performing this activity in retrospection meditation. They believe themselves when they say, I am this and I am that and I. They believe it. But they buy it. Look, hook, line, and sinker. They're deceived. They're trapped in the deception. They're trapped in Shawshank prison. There's no alchemy. There's no transmutation taking place. There's no truth. There's only the deception. There's only the matrix to bring this into, to bring yet another contemporary mythology to bear, right? It's the matrix. Because remember, the matrix is a prison for your mind, Morpheus says to Neo. It's the matrix is deception. It's hypnosis and ignorance. Everybody's asleep. A battery for the AI, a battery for mechanical nature, right? Mechanical nature, taking their body heat and their electromagnetic force. and siphoning that off and using it to power their AI mechanical civilization. And they create the matrix, a prison for all those humans' minds to dream in and to believe themselves to be awake and successful and wealthy and pleasured, surrounding themselves, indulging their pleasures and avoiding pain and all the rest of it. Again, another perfect allegory for what we're talking about here. In order, people think that they're awake. People talk about being awake. People talk about, I am awake. I am awake. I am a God already. I am unlimited abundance. I. The I that says it's awake is completely asleep. The I that believes itself to be awake is mystic pride. That is mystic pride. I am awake. To be awake is to be a Buddha, is to be an enlightened one. To be awake is to have climbed the first mountain of mastery, is to be a master. Now, I don't know what you know about Buddhas and saints and martyrs and so on, but unless you here right now can speak the words of God and know the will of your innermost being here and now in this moment, and be willing to lay down your life for that will, for the will of God, you're not awake. Sorry, you're just not. You might be in the process of awakening, in the same way that an airplane doesn't go from being on the ground to 50,000 feet by snapping its fingers. Neither does any human-like machine awaken like this. It's a process. And we've talked many times, countless times, we've described exactly what that process is and what it looks like. And I shouldn't have to draw this again. This is the process of awakening. So sure, you might be somewhere here on the ladder of Jacob's ladder. You might be somewhere on that ladder, either this level, this level, this level, this level, but there are countless levels. This spiral is much more dense than what I can reasonably draw here. Right? There's levels upon levels of levels and levels and levels of this. So surely you're going to be somewhere in your journey of awakening. But to say that you're awake, we must be cognizant, we must be humble and cognizant of how clever and how subtle the deceivers can be. And as I went into in great detail 3 weeks ago and 4 weeks ago, when I used the word, if you recall, how sinister the great deceiver is, right? The great deceiver, the deceiver of deceivers He has a name. Okay, in both Hebrew and Arabic. I'm going to fix that H to make it look like an H, not an A. It's Shaitan. You know him better as Satan. Our individual Satan, the amalgamation of all of our egos, of all of our deceivers. In other words, Christ is known as the fire of fires and the light of lights. Well, literally, the Antichrist is the deceiver of deceivers, because the adversary is an amalgamation of all of the sources of deception within us. So when we talk about transmuting deception and the transmutation of lead into gold, we're talking about the transmutation of the false self and of Satan, the deceiver of deceivers, into the innermost intimate Christ, the true self, who is just an essence, who is born only once the false self has died. There is no getting around it. Transmutation, a mutant is a new and different organism. Oh, let's my drawing program is not functioning again. Okay, so a mutant undergoes a mutation, and becomes something new, something different, a new species. This is what transmutation of the lead of ego, right? The false self, into gold. The human soul, the solar bodies, the true self, the Christ. No one is going to confuse Christ with Antichrist, I hope. No one is going to say that a mutant wolf is really just the same thing as a wolf. No, it's a mutant. It's mutated. The whole concept of genetics is based around that form, that if a significant enough transmutation justifies the classification of a new species. This is a radical transformation that we're talking about. So radical, in fact, that it necessitates nothing short of death and rebirth. The lead ceases to be. There is no lead in gold. Gold is gold, lead is lead, and never the twain shall meet. They have similar qualities to them, of course, right? They're both pliable. They're both dense. They're both heavy. But one is highly inert. The other is highly toxic, right? One is deadly. The other is the most valuable substance on earth, practically. It has been traditionally for the longest time. The transmutation of deception, of the deceiver, culminates in the death of the false self, the death of the ego, the death. And we cannot facilitate. Remember what I said about the Pharisees, our adversary, our inner shaitan. Because the thing about the Antichrist is the Antichrist in the book of Revelations pretends to be Christ. The Antichrist comes performing all sorts of miracles and convinces the world to bow down and worship him. That's the definition of Antichrist. The Antichrist, just like the Pharisees, pretends to be God's servant and God's messenger and representative on the earth, just like the Pharisees. And as I explained several weeks ago now, how did Jesus cope with the Pharisees? Right? It's all connected. Everything that we've been talking about for weeks now. We're talking about, it all links into today, to this alchemy and the transmutation of deception and the deceiver. What did I say weeks ago now about how relatively easy it was for Jesus to throw the moneylenders and the livestock traders out of the temple? Why was it relatively easy for him to do that? Like, isn't it relatively easy to make this recognition in yourself? To see the deception between I am sad and I feel sad? Isn't that relatively easy? Isn't it obvious that anger and sadness and anxiety and fear and depression and gluttony and laziness, isn't it clear that they have no place in the temple for God, the temple that was built in God's honor, the temple that is supposed to receive the Christ, the light of Christ, and disseminate that light and spread that word into the world to others? That's selflessness, and to give and give. What were the Pharisees? The Pharisees weren't selfless. They were selfish. The money lenders and the money traders, they especially were selfish. They were all completely transactional, right? It's obvious that money lenders and livestock traders do not belong in the temple. The problem is that the Pharisees made themselves indispensable, in the same way that your I and your false self, the great deceiver of deceivers, your own individual Satan, your own individual Antichrist, the ego, the false self, makes himself indispensable to you because it is you. It is the you you identify with. It is the you are attached to. Your thoughts, your beliefs, your desires, your cravings, your aversions, your bingo card filled with all the red X's. Because that's indispensable for you, to you. That's all your experiences. That's everything you know, all your beliefs. The Antichrist convinces us that it belongs in the temple. That is just like the Pharisees. How did Jesus deal with the Pharisees? The Pharisees and the Sadducees, who were the thorn in his side, he couldn't kick them out of the temple. It was their temple. You can't kick the ultimate false self, the Pharisees, out of you. It is you. Jesus said, verily I say unto you, I have not come to bring peace. I came to bring the sword. And I shall tear down this temple, and in 3 days I shall build it anew. I shall erect a new temple where the old one stood. That's death and rebirth. The old self, the ego, must die in order to get rid of the deceiver of deceivers and make way for the fire of fires and the light of lights. A whole new temple is required. A temple that doesn't belong to the Pharisees, but belongs to the innermost intimate Christ and is built by the Christ, for the Christ. That is the ultimate transmutation of the ultimate of deception. Because the ultimate deception is this I that you think you are. And all these people that think that this I that you believe yourself to be can ascend, can go to heaven, is a deception. It's a fantasy. How many times have I used the analogy of a video game? Mario doesn't leave the Nintendo cartridge. Pick up any video game where you play a character in that game. When you put down the game, the character stays in the game and you go on with your life. What's interesting is that there have been science fiction movies that have explored the theme of the player being thrust into the game and into the game world. Tron comes to mind. And Tron was an absolutely extraordinary example of modern mythological myth making in relation to mechanicity and it was so ahead of its time. And the fact that it was made by Disney just shows you how far the apple has fallen from the tree when it comes to Walt Disney, the Walt Disney Corporation. Because even when you watch the original Tron that was made back in the 80s, not only was it an extraordinary achievement of filmmaking, like the filmmaking magic, but the themes and the language being used where these entities in the computer world were asking profound philosophical questions of one another. Do you believe in the user? It was a remarkable allegory. It was incredible. Decades and decades before the Matrix. No doubt having an influence on the Wachowski brothers and the Matrix. But regardless, there have been other examples, not as profound as players getting sucked in to the game world and then finding themselves surrounded by the game. And in more recent years, there have been different versions of this. Wreck-It Ralph is one, right, where Ralph ends up in different video games, and the characters who are supposed to stay in their game, but they crisscross into different universes. It's touching on the same themes, I guess, in a way. Just, Wreck-It Ralph was for kids, right? You could argue that Tron was for kids, but we were cut from a different cloth, Gen X versus versus the millennials and Gen Z. You couldn't make Tron for them today. They would be too traumatized by it. So, one thing to realize in all of this, in the comprehension, once we comprehend the deceiver and we comprehend the nature of the deception and how and where and why and when we fell for the deception, when we achieve that comprehension, we extract that golden truth. We can say that we can use this expression of having. Yeah, okay, go ahead. We can say we've learned, right? We've learned our lesson. Okay, we now know. We know what we did wrong. We know what we did wrong in the past. We've learned our lesson. We've extracted the truth. Well, once you've extracted the truth, the essence from the deceiver can be eliminated. And our Divine Mother takes care of that. But only if we have the energy, if we've preserved the energy in order for her to do that. And next week, we will go further into part 3, where if last week we talked about the transformation of impressions, and this week we talked about the transmutation of deception. Next week, I'll come up with the appropriate title. But it's going to relate to the sublimation which is this. If the step 1 is transformation, step 2 is transmutation, step 3 is sublimation. But it's too much to get into, and I don't want to overwhelm you, and it's better to break things up into more bite-sized pieces. But there is more to the process, because the actual dissolution, the actual judgment and execution of the deceiver has to take place. Here, you can think of it in terms of what we've done today is you've performed the work of an investigative detective, and yeah, let's leave it there. Like, you did the work of Sherlock Holmes. And gotten to the bottom of the deception, right? There was a mystery. There was a deception. There was a con. There was like any intelligence agent. or Sherlock Holmes, or, James Bond. You dove deep into the deception. First, you observed the outer expressions of the deception, the circumstances, and the who, what, where, when, why. But then you went and, like a CIA analyst might, and dove deep into the analysis and meditation, and you comprehended, you unraveled the deception, unraveled in your superior mind. The truth of it revealed itself to you. So from here, there's another step, right? And that step is the prosecution of the deceiver and the final judgment of the deceiver, in order to restore balance, to restore the scales of justice. So we will be getting into that next week. Benjamin says, the people around you often reinforce your false self simply because that's the version of you they've grown used to. So, how do you avoid being transactional in your interactions? How do you show up authentically and let your true self come through? It's called courage. And it's called discernment, because you don't cast pearls before swine. So sometimes you have to play the role that people expect you to play. We have to be practical. It's interesting that you bring that up, or you ask that way, because just serendipitously, Benjamin, a couple of videos crossed my path in the last 24 hours. One of them is Bishop Mari Emmanuel talking about the chosen ones and why we often are alone and isolated. And the other one is Napoleon something or other, talking about why God breaks the men that he chooses to use. God breaks the men that he has chosen to do his work for him. And in both of those videos, the themes are very, very, very similar. To be a chosen one is a very lonely path. It's a lonesome path. It's one that we walk alone. We're not truly alone, obviously, because we have our innermost and our divine mother with us at all times. God, these gentlemen, I will share the links, and I will put the links in. I will post them to Facebook as well, so you will have them. But I'll put them in the chat in just a moment. I'm pulling up a program that I have them in. Napoleon Hill. So Napoleon Hill was a Southern minister, and Bishop Mari Emmanuel is a Orthodox Catholic priest. So if you will indulge me a moment. So there's the link to the talk by Bishop Mari Emmanuel about being alone. And here's the link to let me type it in here because it's not gonna Napoleon Hill. Okay. God breaks the man he wants to use. Okay. I encourage you, Benjamin, especially to listen to these two talks. They're very fiery. They're very passionate. Not my style. Certainly, but that's because, I mean, hopefully for obvious reasons. Would you guys come here if if every talk I gave was like the uh the sermons that these preachers are giving? I'm not sure. But you must admire the passion, the fire that they have. And both of them talk about that fire. And they talk about the fact that that fire, the normies, the uninitiated, the unchosen ones, are repelled by that fire, which is why you're asking the question in the first place. How do you be your authentic self around people who are still asleep, the materialists, the the empiricists, the consumers, the atheists, whatever the case may be, or even your family, just the unbelievers. It's just the people going through the motions and living their life in their own way at their level. You're not at their level. How do you be your authentic self? Well, just be. Rely on the faith and guidance of your innermost being. But in order for you to do that, you have to rid yourself of the great deceiver. A man cannot serve two masters. And I believe it's the Napoleon Hill sermon where he explicitly says, God isn't breaking you out of cruelty. God is not emptying you to be cruel. He is emptying you so that he may fill you up. And whereas self-help gurus and the new age and the contemporary approach is to take out the trash in order to fill it back up with different trash, right? That's like the bingo card that I was showing you, replacing all the X's with O's. God's way is different. Empty out the trash to fill your vessel with light, with gold. That's the transmutation that we're talking about, the true transformation of lead into gold. You see, the self-help gurus and the new agers don't know anything about this. They think that you can reinvent yourself. No, you don't reinvent yourself. You're robbing Peter to pay Paul. The same egos that created the old self are creating the new self. Rest assured. They're just taking off the clothes of a loser and a poor pauper and putting on the clothes of a winner and a successful millionaire or, actor or whatever the case may be, right? They're just changing costumes because the egos are the great deceivers. They're just, all the world's a stage. So your egos don't care if you're this way or that way. Like fear or pride doesn't care if you love yourself too much or you hate yourself. Doesn't care. Pride doesn't care. Just as long as you're self-absorbed and self-obsessed. It's very well known that narcissism, right, goes hand in hand with victimhood. But the biggest victims, the people walking around playing the victim card all the time, they're perpetual chronic victims. They're the biggest narcissists. Poor me, poor me, poor me, poor me. So anyway, those talks, I know that you will find them very valuable. And Benjamin, and he knows it intuitively. He says thank you. And Beaful, I'm guessing that was an emoji. Okay. So listen, everyone. I think that wraps it up for today. I want to leave it open to you to have any ask any questions. And while you're typing in your questions, I told you that to remind me at the end about sugar. And there, you may be familiar with these trends that have been going around, the anti-carb, low carb, high fat, keto diets, carnivore diets. There's all these crazy diets to lose weight and keep it off. And there's a counter movement, actually, a equally kind of extreme movement on the other side. You have the high fat, low carb, high protein people on one side. And on the other side, you have people doing what's called the sugar diet, which is high carb, low fat, and lean protein. And I've been looking into this all week because there is an untold, unspoken, but well understood, well known middle ground that we are being divided and conquered instead of being shown something that should be self-evident. Sugar has been vilified and demonized, and you have people running around like Dr. Robert Lustig running around telling people that fruit is poison and that fruit causes type 2 diabetes and all kinds of nonsense. The fact of the matter is that you can eat all the fruit that you want and you won't gain any weight. And it's not the healthiest thing in the world to do for a long period of time. But you would have to eat so much fruit and drink so much soda pop and eat so much sugar to gain weight. It's ridiculous. You probably wouldn't be able to stomach it. So you might be asking, well, then what is he talking about? But we have a diabetes epidemic and an obesity epidemic and so on. So what the hell's going on? Well, what's going on is it is the combination of sugar and fat that is making everybody sick. That is making everybody, and it is the inclusion of things like polyunsaturated fats. So all of the highly processed seed oils and canola oils and all this kind of stuff, but even some fish oils. The omega 3s and the omega 6s, for instance. The simple truth is that food scientists have known for decades that sugar alone doesn't make anybody addicted. You can't be addicted to sugar. If you were addicted to sugar, right now, you would be going to your pantry in your kitchen and opening up the bag of white granulated sugar and eating it with a tablespoon, because that's how addictions work. That's how addictions work. Most people have white sugar in their cupboard, especially if you bake. But even if you don't bake, even if you just have it there for when guests come so you can offer them sugar in their coffee. And sugar is like, what, 99 cents a bag? Like a couple pounds of sugar is like, it's what, it's white granulated sugar is cheap. It's the cheapest drug on the planet. People aren't eating white sugar out of the bag with a spoon. They should if they were addicted to it, but they're not. And it's self-evident. It's self-evident. What I am saying to you is true, because anybody who's addicted to anything else, alcoholics will drink, gosh, it's like they'll drink like almost anything to get their fix. Heroin addicts, any addict of anything will like do just about anything to get their fix. How come people with type 2 diabetes or morbidly obese people, how come they're not buying sugar by the bag and eating it with a spoon? It's because they're not addicted to sugar. In the same way, in the exact same way, nobody, and I mean nobody, is buying pounds of butter or big tubs of margarine or Crisco and eating that with a spoon. In other words, you can't be addicted to fat. You can't. It's impossible. Try it. You also can't overeat protein. I mean, you can if you go to a Texas plate and they give you one of those huge tomahawk steaks or whatever, which is more meat than any human requires at any one sitting. But food scientists have known this for decades and decades and decades. They built the food pyramid knowing this and the truth of what I'm about to tell you. And you know it intuitively and practically in your life. It is the combination of carbohydrates and fats that gets us. And the inclusion of protein in there, can or cannot, you'll take it or leave it, right? Many people eat cheese pizzas, no pepperoni, right? And let's face it, even pepperoni is mostly fat. But it's sugar and carbs or salt. Or sorry, I didn't mean to say sugar and carbs. It's sugar and fat or salt and fat. And sometimes it's sugar and salt and fat, because that's another thing that they've vilified. They've convinced the world that salt is a problem. You know that if you don't eat salt, you'll die. Salt is an essential electrolyte. We cannot process energy in the body without salt. And not just table salt, not just sodium. We need magnesium and potassium. We need a whole wide spectrum of salts. They're called electrolytes, and they're called that because they're essential for transporting electricity across this biochemical machine that we call our bodies. The salt is not the problem either. You try eating salt with a teaspoon. You can't do it. People talk about being a saltaholic. You're not a saltaholic. You're not. Because you cannot eat salt with a teaspoon. Just like you can't eat table sugar with a tablespoon. And you can't eat butter with one either. These things, they're not addictive. You're not addicted to them. And they're not unhealthy, taken on their own. But when you combine them, carbs and starches, and you combine them with fat, what did we all grow up on as kids? And when we saw our mom grab the blue and orange box out of the cupboards, we all went, yay! Right? Because we were going to get macaroni and cheese. Who doesn't like mac and cheese? Or like I was saying earlier, a cheese pizza, right? A cheese pizza with a nice, tomato pizza, tomato sauce on there, because there's lots of sugar in that tomato sauce. It's practically ketchup. It's fat, starches, and sugar. It's fat, starches, and sugar. It's fats and carbs, right? And then there's salt on there. It's the combination of these things that we get addicted to. You're addicted to Doritos. You're not addicted to, just plain corn. Have you ever tried to eat unsalted tortilla chips? Try it sometime. Right? But there are levels and levels and levels. But when you think about it, again, people talk about insulin levels and spiking insulin levels. And that if you want to keep your insulin levels low, because when the insulin levels spike, it's a signal for the body to start storing fat. But guess what? When you just eat sugar, it spikes insulin, but there's no fat to store. So it has nothing to store. And what it's storing is the sugar. It's converting the sugar into glycogen. And where is it storing it? It's storing it in your liver, and it's storing it in your muscles. And our body has a tremendous capacity to store excess glycogen, so long as we're muscular. Now, if you constantly keep overeating sugar so much that you fill up all your glycogen stores, well, then yes, when your body runs out of places to put glycogen, then it'll start converting it into fat. But you have to eat a lot of sugar to get to that point, if all you're eating is sugar. But that's obviously not the problem. How many people eat plain bread? How many people eat plain crackers? Well, crackers is already a problem, because crackers are made with shortening, so there's already fat in them. How many people eat straight noodles? Just noodles, or just plain rice? You eat white rice with nothing else. How many people do that? No, we got to have the curry sauce on there, and we have to have this and that, and the right? It's the combination. Like I was saying earlier, the mac and cheese, or the cheese pizza, or whatever. It's the combination of these things that we get addicted to. And it's when you combine the simple carbohydrates and the sugars with the fat, now the insulin spikes, and the body says, whoa, we got all this glycogen coming in, so we're going to burn that for energy. Oh, what's this here? What's this huge pile of fat here that's coming in with this glycogen? Well, we don't need that for energy, because we have all this glycogen. We have all this sugar for energy. And we have this insulin spike to process that sugar into glycogen and to store it in our muscles, to put it in the blood and shuffle it off to the liver and all the muscles. So you know what we're going to do with this excess fat? We're not going to spend any energy converting that into energy, because we don't need it. So because we have a high insulin spike, off the fat goes to the gut, to the bum, to wherever the body wants to put it, to the liver. That's why we have type 2 diabetes and an obesity epidemic and all the chronic illnesses related to obesity and overeating. It's because the food scientists, every manufactured, every chain restaurant, every manufactured item on grocery store shelves that comes in a bag or a box or a bucket has been designed by food scientists to maximize triggering of the pleasure center in the hypothalamus in the brain. In other words, it's been maximized to be the most addictive they can possibly make it. They would say the most palatable with the longest shelf life possible. They will use these kinds of euphemisms. But no, it's been engineered to be the most delicious and addictive food you can imagine. And if you call them on it, I say, why do you have to put so much fat? Why do you have to put shortening? Why do you have to put these they're called PUFAs, right? Polyunsaturated fatty acids. Why do you have to put so much salt or so much sugar or so much anything? They said, well, if we didn't, you wouldn't be able to eat it. And they're right, because most of us don't eat cardboard, because that's what crackers would be like if they didn't put all the shortening in it and all the salt, and that's what cookies would be like if they didn't have the sugar. It would be like eating wallboard. So they're not wrong, and they give the people what they want. The people want tasty things, and that's what we're addicted to. But that's not what the narrative is, right? The narrative is always the vilification of a single ingredient, like the scapegoating of sugars and carbs. No, you can't eat that stuff. You got to go keto. You got to go carnivore. No, you can't eat fruit. You have to eat like the carnivores ate, like the paleo diet. And then vegans like, no, you can't eat meat. You can't eat animal products. It has to be only plants. It has to be only this, only that. And it's this fanatical religiosity applied to diet. So I'm sharing all this with you. It's a very, keep it really, really, really simple. A nice overall balanced diet, right? Eat whatever you want. Keep it healthy, whole foods as much as possible, right? Okay, when you have fruit, when you have carbs, starches, sugars, the fat comes down, right? High carb, low fat. High fat, low carb. Don't mix your fats and your sugars in high quantities. So ice cream, have a scoop, one scoop. Pizza, have it, once every couple of months, have a couple slices. And if you do combine carbs with fat, for whatever reason, you have some French fries, or you want to live. You don't have to be so restrictive about things. Every now and then you can indulge. Even once a week, you can have a so-called cheat meal where you have, have your hamburger and French fries, right? The fatty burgers with the fatty cheeseburger with the bun. I mean, that's a no-no, right? You're mixing your starches, your carbs, and your fat. And the French fries are starches fried in fat, right? This is a general no-no. But once a week, one meal, have a meal like that. Before you have 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar in about 2 cups of water. Put a couple drops of stevia in there, and drink that 5 or 10 minutes before your meal. And after your meal, go for a 10 or 20 minute, 30-minute walk. Those will help keep your insulin levels from spiking and prevent your body from immediately shuffling all that fat onto your body and into your liver, etc. It's this balance. It's understanding this balance. If you're going to have lots of sugars and lots of carbs, for God's sakes, don't put sweetened whipped cream on your strawberries. Don't do it. Don't have strawberries and cream, right? You want to have something that's like strawberries and cream? Use 0-fat Greek yogurt and sweeten it with monk fruit sweetener. Actually, if you're doing 0-fat Greek yogurt, you can just sweeten it with icing sugar, regular icing sugar. Put or regular sugar, or even maple syrup or honey. So sweeten a 0-fat Greek yogurt and have that with your strawberries, and there's your cookies and cream. But because it's zero fat, the sugar and the strawberries will spike your insulin, but there's zero fat, so there's nothing. So it's fine. You'll be fine. But if you do whipping cream and strawberries, and it's sweetened whipping cream, well, now you have a problem, right? So I share this with you because it's like the simplest. It's the simplest thing. If people were just taught this, you can have as much sugar as you want, but when you do, absolutely minimize the fat when you do. And you can have as much fat as you want, but when you do, minimize the carbs, starches, and sugars. Just understand that those things, never the twain shall meet. That's all, right? And you can have protein with either of them. When you have fat, you can have fatty meat, and when you have sugar, you can have lean protein. And just keep that in mind, and you'll be fine. And it's simple. You don't need food pyramids, and you don't need all kinds of these crazy wacky diets. And so all you have to do is remember that in nature does not combine fat with sugar, generally speaking. There are exceptions to every rule, like nuts, for example. Nuts and seeds, you can run into, you know, situations that you've got like combinations of high fat, but even then, the carbs in nuts is, generally speaking, fiber. You don't there aren't many. Cashews are an exception, right? That's why you don't eat a lot of cashews, because cashews are very fatty and they're very high in carbohydrates. So that's why you can get very fat very quickly eating cashews. So don't do it. So I know you don't come here for nutrition advice, but this just happens to be something that came across my path this week. And again, I like to remind us that we have to be really practical, and that if we're working on being our best selves and taking care of our temple, then nutrition does play a role. And I know that for my part, all of this crazy dieting stuff on the internet, especially on YouTube and everywhere, people get so fanatical about pounding their chest and browbeating that their diet is the only diet or the best diet or this or that. And people can become, like I said, really fanatical about it. And they all have different reasons why, and they all have different anecdotal evidence and so on and so forth. I think it really simply comes down to something very simple. It's like a simple formula, and say, if you want to, don't have a big fatty meal and then top it off with a sweet dessert. Okay, don't do that. If you want to have your dessert, if you want to have something sweet, have it earlier in the day, a couple hours before you have your fatty meal, right? Have your fruit or your sweets or whatever as a snack in between meals, but have them earlier in the morning when your body is coming off of a fast anyway. And so start with a fruit smoothie in the morning, right? Just make sure that if you're going to blend in any yogurt, that you use low fat yogurt or no fat yogurt when you do it. And then you'll have the energy that you need, carry, right to lunchtime, or right through lunchtime to dinner, and then dinner, have a normal regular dinner. Because a lot of these diets, including the sugar diet and including the keto diet, these create a lot of stress in the body. And for myself, for a long time, I've been experimenting and going on different diets or exploring different nutritional approaches. And for me, one of the keys is to finding the right balance and absolutely minimizing the stress on the body. This is true. What I'm saying, I've also applied to my exercise regimen. So I no longer do hours and hours of hard cardio or whatever, right? I don't spend hours and hours in the gym lifting weights every week. I I don't do it. I don't I don't um impose that kind of stress on my body. I don't want to subject my body to that kind of stress. For what? To look good? No, I want to be healthy. I want to be healthful. And a lot of people that you see who have washboard abs or whatever, they look really thin or they so-called look healthy, they look fantastic, really aren't. Metabolically, they might be completely stressed out. They might be suffering. Their organs might be completely covered in visceral fat. They might be suffering from fatty liver disease and not know it. Right? So it's not about how you look, it's about being healthy. And that balance and that energy balance needs to be there with everything that we do, exercise, nutrition. And for me, at least, this past week, as I've was delving into the sugar diet and looking into the physiology of it all, and it just finally just clicked for me. And and as I move forward with this, going forward with through my own experience, um, who knows? Maybe at some point in the future, I'll dedicate a live stream to what Glorianne has a lecture series online called Healthy Spirituality, and they get into a whole different level of nutrition that I've talked about a little bit in the past, but it's the esoteric or the occult level of nutrition. So the different elements as they relate to different types of foods and how they feed not just our physical body, but our metaphysical bodies in relation to the elements that are involved. So, for example, grains being associated with earth, and grapes being associated with the air, and and everything in between, right? So, so maybe I'll broach that topic at some point in the future again, but in combination with what I'm experiencing and learning and practicing now, I want to arrive at a deeper level of understanding of it all. So I'm going to be spending some time in meditation on all of this as well, exploring some of the deeper significance, because it all comes down to energy balance. Our metabolic health comes down to energy transportation and conversion, right? The transformation of energy. All of the patterns, all of the archetypes exist as above, so below. So when today we were talking about alchemy and the transmutation of deception, well, the body is doing much the same thing when it's transmuting and transforming, right, from this substance into actual energy that's usable by the body, right? That's a transmutation. That's an alchemical process that's taking place in our bodies. So these applications are far reaching, as above, so below, metaphysical, physical, the metaphysical bodies, the mental body, the consciousness, and in our physical bodies as well. So, and of course, we know from our immune system and everything else, we're fighting all kinds of bacteria and parasites and all sorts of invaders in the same way that we have to do that consciously in our psychology, fighting off the parasitic entities that we call egos that are trying to live off of us. So it's all connected. It's all part and parcel of a package deal, if you will, because we have to be infinitely practical. We're here now, and our temple, whether we like it or not, is a physical phenomenon. And in order to prepare that temple in the best possible way, yeah, we got to clear out the money lenders and the livestock traders, but we also have to prepare that temple to receive the Christ. And for me, being healthful is a part of that. I'm not obsessed with it. I'm certainly not obsessed with the way I look necessarily, but being healthy and having the energy and the vitality to be able to do the work is important. So I just thought I'd tag that on to the end of today because it was relevant to me this week, and hopefully you can find some benefit in it in your own life, especially in recognizing that if you're struggling with any metabolic illnesses or syndromes, or perhaps your weight or anything else like that, something as simple as, don't combine your fats and sugars, your simple carbs and your fats. Keep them. If one goes up, the other one goes down. Just remember that seesaw. Make it a seesaw in your mind, right? Put carbs on one seesaw and just adjust the balance scales accordingly, and you'll be off to the races, I think. Okay, since nobody has had any questions or comments, I take it you've had plenty of time listening to me ramble about food. You've had plenty of time to type something, so I'm going to take it that there are no questions or comments anymore. Oh, there's one. Benjamin says, "Thank you so much for today's live stream. It was genuinely eye-opening and really helpful in understanding how to recognize and work through the deceptions of the ego and the false self. I'm grateful for the clarity and the warmth you brought to such an important topic." You're welcome, Benjamin. It was my pleasure. Any more comments or questions? Give you a minute or two. How's that? What else can I say in the meantime? Not much. I shared with you these links, the Bishop Mari and Napoleon Hill. Hopefully I'll remember to post them on Facebook as soon as we're done the live stream. And then you guys, if you can't grab it for whatever reason out of the chat, then and I do encourage you to watch those, because if you've ever felt yourself alone, or if you are alone and feel yourself lonely, and wonder why you haven't found a spouse, then the Bishop Mari lecture is for you. And if you just feel in over your head and you're wondering why you have to go through so much suffering, then the Napoleon Hill lecture is for you. Either way, they both deal more or less with the same topics. That, some of the language, it may not hit home for you. Some of the language, some of the words used, but look past the specific words being used and feel into the spirit of the words, right? And you'll be right there. You'll connect with it, and it's something. All of this, you're gonna know it in your heart, but sometimes it's nice to hear it from somebody else, right? Not from me. And certainly because I'm not going to give the type of fiery sermon that these guys can and will and do. All right, so thank you once again for coming out today and being a part of our weekly show. I wish you all the very best for the coming week, and as always, take care of yourself, take care of those you love, be humble, and be observant. Transform your perceptions, transmute the deceptions, and inferential peace. Take care, everyone.